Hi, everybody. I'm Elin Hilderbrand. Welcome to the discussion for my Literati book group, The Beach and Beyond. Today, I am joined by Caitlin Macy, who wrote my September pick, which is Mrs. Caitlin. Hello, Caitlin. How are you?
Hi, I'm glad to be here.
Are you in New York City?
I am, and this is such a nice break from the usual day. So
I know that is I'm so excited to have you. Okay, so for those of you who are part of my Beach and Beyond book group and who have read Mrs., and hopefully everybody on this group has read Mrs. because there may be spoilers. This is definitely the Beyond the Beach. Mrs. is a novel about an exclusive nursery school in Manhattan, and it basically focuses on the mothers and the fathers of the children that go there and all of their drama. So, Caitlin, can you tell me a little bit about how you came up, how this book came to be, how you came up with the idea, etc.?
Yes. Well, I was standing outside of nursery school, where my daughter went, on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. And I'm not a New Yorker by birth. I grew up in the sticks in the country in Massachusetts, and moved here after college. So this wasn't a given. I definitely have felt like an outsider here. And but I was sort of imagining, there are all these really, really well-heeled women who are just immaculately dressed, super fashionable, sort of waiting to pick up their children. And I got to thinking, in sort of a contrarian way, oh come on, but we were the generation that grew up with the hookup culture, and people had bad nights and so on, and yet here we're all sitting here as if it's all just been one straight line to sort of Park Avenue perfection. And I started to think about the pasts that we all must have had, and how it just sort of struck me as kind of interesting that you'd never know, and yet at the same time there were those of us who dated one another. People would sometimes find an ex-boyfriend among the parent body. I remember being on a ski trip and running into a guy on a ski trip that I hadn't seen in 20 years, and sort of going, oh God. And so I started to think about, well, what if these pasts came to light? And that was sort of the germ of it.
Okay, I'm completely fascinated. So, wow. All right. So this was sort of loosely based on your experience. And it's true. Like when you have, I mean, a lot of us who are going to be watching this have taken our children to school for drop off and pick up, right? It's something that you do as a parent, or a lot of us do as a parent. And it's a very privileged, as much as I'm sure I complained about dropping off and picking up my own children, which I did for years and years and years. It's also, we're very privileged to be able to do it because it means we have the freedom in our day to get there and back, right? So, but especially in a very fancy school like the one you described, St. Timothy's in Mrs., you have a lot of, all of these women come with their own story. And so, can you talk a little bit about the storylines and how they intersect? So we have Gwen, who is our heroine, and is she the most sort of like you, Caitlin? Would you say?
Yeah, I mean, in certain ways. I mean, I always think that I can't remember who said it, but whoever, when somebody was asked, who are all these people, and he apparently said, no, they're all me, but, so other than maybe a couple that I don't feel any connection with. But yeah, so I really like the structure of the two couples. I'd love to explore that again. It's such a classic structure. I read Anna Karenina late in life. I didn't read it as a student. I sort of thought one day, I've got to read that. And I just picked it up and read it. And I was really taken with the structure of the two couples, the one more bourgeois and the one more sort of, passionate and so on, Anna and Vronsky. And so I don't know, I didn't set out to do that, but I definitely felt that this Manhattan scene certainly needed an outsider's perspective on it, or just to me, it's not as interesting. So that's sort of where I landed with Gwen. I mean, like Gwen, I came from a small town of people who sort of prided themselves on, I don't know what the opposite is, but the extreme unpretension. I mean, sort of the worst thing where I was from was, to be pretentious and to be overdressed or anything like that. So I sort of wanted somebody from that world. Now, that said, I went away. I left my hometown early. I went to boarding school and so on. But so yeah, I guess the yin yang of somebody who was sort of more salt of the earth, and then somebody who was more sort of seemingly of it, and yet also, as we discussed a minute ago, having more of a past herself, so that she felt that kept her apart. And then finally, a character who was Latina from Spanish Harlem, who was an outsider in a totally different way. So sort of, New York's funny that way. Most people sort of think of themselves as outsiders, it turns out. And there are very few people, I think, who think, oh yes, I'm the, I'm the New Yorker. We're all sort of just showing up here. So
Right. Absolutely fascinating. So really it's the three couples, right? It's the three couples interacting, and I love, and Gwen is such a complex character, and the things that I really loved about her are that she does come from this modest background, and her mother in particular is just very on her, to not be pretentious. She makes the homemade dessert every night. That was like a detail that I love to cook, and it really sort of defined her for me. And her husband has a prestigious job, but not one that makes a ton of money. So he's in a position of power working for the SEC, or he works for the DA's office, or you'll tell me exactly. But he is in a position of power, but he doesn't make a ton of money. So they're in a different socioeconomic strata of the very top strata. Whereas Philippa and Jed, they're at the very top strata. And then I love how Philippa and Gwen grew up together. I mean, it was and then some of them went to college together. They went to college with the other dude, the other husband, and he's the one in trouble. I mean, it was fascinating the way you sort of braided these lives together, using the financial crisis of 2009. So I am just a huge fan of this book. When I read it, I'm just going to brag and say that I took it with me on safari. I've taken my children on safari one time only, right? Like one time only. And when you go on safari, you are in such an other situation. You are really on the other side of the world doing this incredibly exotic thing, the most exotic thing you'll ever do. But I had misses, and I found it oddly comforting, because I was like, know this place. And I'm like, okay, but I'm also in my head sort of back in New York, and I read it on my way home also. And it reminded me so much of Big Little Lies. I preferred it to Big Little Lies. I cannot believe I'm saying that, but I preferred it to Big Little Lies just because I found the writing so smart. And I had sort of a stronger connection. I too lived in Manhattan ever so briefly when I was in my 20s, but enough. And I mean, I was dirt poor, and I was working in publishing, and then I was teaching in the inner city schools. And I mean, I had no money, but I knew enough, right? You get it enough to sort of understand the world. So let's go back. I want to talk about your sort of origin story and how you came to write this novel. And is this your first novel, Caitlin? No.
No. So I had a first novel, a Bildungsroman, first person, coming to New York. The only thing was I swapped it out a little bit, and it had a male narrator.
Okay.
I think because maybe some of the material was too close, and it was a way to distance myself from the material a little bit. So that my first novel was called The Fundamentals of Play. And so then I had done a story collection. And so to put the end first, sort of, I'd never done a third person novel. And you're such a master of the third person novel. But I thought, well, this is sort of the grail. And if you can't do that, who are you, sort of thing. So I had this idea that I really wanted to do third person. And then, as I said, the idea came to me. So that was sort of, it wasn't quite as schematic as I'm making it sound. Like, I didn't sort of say, I'm going to write a third person novel, but it just sort of
Right.
seemed like what was in the offing to come next. But yeah, in terms of origin story, you mean where he grew up and so on?
Well, I want to know, like, how, like, when did you know you wanted to be a writer, and then how did you get your first novel published? Because even sort of the autobiographical-ish first person novel, they're hard to get published, especially now.
Oh. So it sounds as if we sort of had a similar trajectory in certain ways, which is that I came to New York. I got a job in publishing. Made $16,000 a year working for a literary agent, and I went all through school on financial aid, so I had a lot of debt. I was super poor. But I got a job in publishing, which was great. And then the way I had a funny sort of side gig, the way I paid for myself, because 16.5, I think I got up to 16.5. That doesn't go too far, it turns out.
Right.
So I got a job. The agent I worked for represented children's books.
Okay.
And at one point she said to me, she had no idea I wanted to be a writer, because I sort of kept that under wraps at the beginning. I didn't out myself as, I'm only here to sort of make, figure it out, not to climb the ranks of publishing. But anyway, she represented a woman who started a series. It was a time of series books for kids were really big. And, it was the moment of the Babysitters Club and so on. And she had a client who started a series called the Saddle Club. And it was about girls who rode horses.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And so I'd had a horse growing up, and she knew that. And she said, and this woman was looking for ghostwriters because the series had taken off and she had to produce one a month or something like that. So I got this side gig ghostwriting Saddle Club books. So that was how I sort of, supplemented the publishing income. So I wrote something like 12 of them or 13.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
I got really fast. I could do one in, 10 days or something. So anyway, that was a huge boon for me. And it sort of got me through my 20s. So yeah, I'd always, I was just one of these kids who, I loved creative writing. I was always making up stories. I never wanted anything else. I sort of pretended to be interested in other things here and there, but I got through college and I just thought, well, you've got to go to New York. You've got to get near writing anyway. So the idea was publishing, because I just wasn't one of those people who can, I'd see classmates, peers who would go off to some, farm in Vermont and isolate themselves and just write with a capital WR, and I just wasn't that person. I sort of needed the milieu, and I guess maybe I felt instinctively that I might be writing more about the social milieu. So yeah, so I worked in publishing, and then eventually I decided to get an MFA, and I went back and got an MFA at Columbia. By and large, and it was a great program, nothing against it, but I think the main driver was actually that I didn't know how to announce that I wanted to write, and this gave me sort of cover. The grad school gave me cover.
I'm going to stop you right there because I'm so interested, because I also got an MFA. I went to Iowa, and those of us that went to Iowa were, and I think it's probably, back in the day anyway, it was pretty well known that you either went to Iowa or you went to Columbia, but the two were really different. The two programs were really different. The one thing I can say about Iowa is that nobody paid any money. So you went for free and then you had to work. So my first year, actually, I had a fellowship. I didn't have to work. But my second year, I taught. I was a teaching writing fellow, and I taught an undergrad class in creative writing. What was your MFA experience like at Columbia?
Yeah, obviously Iowa is the grail. Columbia, I think is if you're in New York and so on, it was a good experience. I also got a fellowship, and then I supplemented it with the Saddle Club. So I didn't really come out with loans, or they were sort of manageable. But I do think that, particularly for people that were in the same building as us, the film people. People came out of these MFA programs in film with giant amounts of debt. So I just feel like caveat emptor. The MFA is not, it's not a necessary thing that you really have to do. So I just urge people always when they tell me they're contemplating it to just make sure you look at what what sort of what the financial situation is.
Right.
But I worked with Joyce Johnson, who wrote Minor
Yeah.
Characters, and I really just thought she was a super helpful reader. And there were a couple good people in the program who were great readers too. But I basically feel like these programs, what they really have, in my opinion, is this sort of ask the audience button, where you're putting yourself out there finally. And, there's always going to be a couple scattershot opinions of, that you have to ignore, whether for, it's almost like, discarding the best score and the worst score. But that sort of ask the audience, where you're putting it out there, and generally the class will kind of go, or, oh yeah. I mean, that's that's what you get out of it, really, because there's not always a way to get your things read.
Right.
Unless you're in a program where you're sort of, I think nowadays it's so different, because honestly, the internet, I mean, we didn't, I'm sure there's tons of, people coming out of college just starting writing groups, being involved, I didn't have that so much. Maybe I was too protective of it. I definitely have a little bit of a Emily Dickinson thing, like, let's hide this in a drawer and not show it to anyone. So
okay.
it was good in that I managed to sort of, say to people, no, I'm actually going to try to do this, which was kind of a relief, instead of sort of secretly trying to, I'll just secretly send my short story to a magazine and then they'll take it and I'll be famous overnight. That was sort of wasting a lot of time and mental energy. So it was just good to be in the milieu and have peer review, peers reading it.
Right. Did you find, I want to ask this carefully, but because, at Iowa, there were all these, of course, all we did was talk about what people were doing at Columbia. And I think we had this vision that like everybody was like very urban and edgy, and like the work was really avant-garde, and that they were sort of, the citified version. I mean, we were out in the country in this, there was nothing, on the one hand, I literally could speak for the whole hour about like the different, like there was nothing to do in Iowa City except get your writing done. And so in some sense, for me, like the gift that Iowa gave me was that it showed me how to get my work done, and also we didn't have to take any other classes. I don't know if that was true for you. We did not have to do a single thing except to go to workshop and produce for workshop. And so that was really, and even some people couldn't even do that, honestly, Caitlin. Some people couldn't even show up and get their work done, but that was our job. And was it like that for you guys, or did you have to take other classes?
It's funny that it's funny to hear that, like, have to, because in fact, the other classes that I took were actually my favorite classes up at Columbia. I took, I guess we did have to. I don't know. I took German for 2 years, and I took this amazing class at Barnard called France on Film that I never forgot. French film studies class. So for me, that was sort of fun. And in terms of, it's funny because, again, I'm not a native New Yorker, but living up at Columbia and Morningside Heights, it really is its own world. Yeah. So compared to working downtown, living on the Upper East Side, as I had my first few years in the city, it actually felt, it wasn't Iowa City, certainly, but it felt that you were at quite a remove from the rest of the city.
Right.
Mostly stayed up in our little world. I don't really remember it as a time of super avant-garde experimentation.
Right.
I think most people really wanted to publish, and happily enough, most of my classmates, they did end up publishing, whether so I think they had a pretty good, I could be wrong in terms of percentage, but it just seemed like, the 5-6 years out, you'd sort of, that guy published, she's doing that, they sort of found a way to do it. So that was encouraging. I'm sure there's another whole swath of people that left bitterly and never, never looked at it again. But
that's so funny, because I would say, I mean, it's almost like proximity. I know about the sort of insular nature because I long ago had a boyfriend who was at the business school. So the years that I lived in Manhattan, he was up at 120th Street, doing Columbia Business School things. But it also might be proximity to the publishers, because I would not say, like, some of the people that I went to Iowa with went on to publish books, but not as many as I would have thought, quite honestly. Okay, but I have to pivot because now we're running out of time. So okay, I want to ask, I have two big questions, but let me just give you a question from one of our readers who asked me on the app. And this is a big spoiler. So for anybody who hasn't finished the book, just like hit mute until you see me wave my arms. He asked about your decision to have Jed die at the end of the book. And I guess, so I'm asking for her. It did seem so sad because he is actually a character that you have has a lot of sympathy for. And he's sort of about to realize, I think, his dream in some sense, and then he's killed in the car crash. So what was your decision? What made you make that decision?
Yeah, it's funny. I've been asked that before, and sometimes I always think back to how I can't remember, was it David Copperfield, but you know how Dickens changed his mind and he let the little girl live or something, and maybe if you had to do it again, I'd let him live. I don't know. I'd have to look at it, but I always have been interested in the idea of somebody who's taking the pain, the blame, the buck stops here, sort of a person, a figure
Right.
in these societal groups. And it so often feels like there's got to be a scapegoat. I love that short story, The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas. And Ursula Le Guin, and she, you know, what she does so well is that, you know, you have this society and it's sort of predicated on something, but what is it predicated on? There's like evil guy here. And it just always feels like it's not the truly evil bad dude who gets, you know, they always walk away. So
Right.
often walk away. And it's actually sort of the person who is the one whose hands are clean and doesn't deserve any of it, who sort of has to, I don't know, swallow it. And I mean, there's different ways of swallowing it, obviously. But
Yes.
and so death by car accident is probably one of the worst. But you know, I just thought the happy ending, it didn't totally speak to me. It was almost as if, you know, he had to die in order for her to live, to sound over dramatic about it. But that's sort of what I felt. You know, he had to go. And also just being, he also, I think, had to go symbolically, because to my mind, he represents old New York, which is sort of pretty much gone. And I think that, you know, whether for better or worse, he sort of had to be sacrificed so that, you know, everyone could come in and do their gut job on their palatial apartment sort of thing. It was kind of I don't know, tenuous tie, but
I found it a very satisfying ending, although I was sad, and especially for the little girl. Okay, so two more questions that I have. I'll ask, are you working on another novel?
So as of maybe yesterday, I am, because I just handed in a book of short stories.
Okay, gotcha.
So yeah, so I was doing stories again, not on purpose to go back to stories, but I just that's what sort of took off during COVID. So I talked to my editors and said, hey, can I give you stories instead? And they said sure. So now I'll probably do it. Yeah, now finally I have an idea.
Okay, it's hard. I mean, obviously I know, because I'm like on this ridiculous deadline. But I'm also retiring in 2024. So I only have, and I'm finishing. Yeah. So I'm finishing my 2022 book now. And then once that's done, I'll only have 2 books left. And everybody else is upset, but guess who's excited? Ellen is excited.
I feel like you're going to be back writing under a pen name and we won't know.
I mean, it's a very, very interesting thing. I mean, so I guess that's like an ancillary question to this is, so you obviously were moved to write stories. Stories are hard to sell, right? I mean, that's really the thing. It's like there used to be, maybe I'm wrong about this, but it felt like back in the day, I'm 52. Back in the day when I was in college, we were all reading the New Yorker, right? We all read the New Yorker. You know, the fiction in the New Yorker was like the thing that you just hung your hat on. It was just, everybody was reading it. And I'm not sure, is that still happening? I don't think so.
I don't think so. I mean, I think, yeah, I was really grateful that they allowed me to sub stories for what was meant to have been a second novel in my contract. I don't think so. And at the same time, I think obviously that you have to write what you're compelled to write. And so I kept having these ideas for stories. And I guess, you know, they've been nice enough to let me do it. And they sort of have some idea that, you know how, I mean, one always hopes, right? But it seems like on the one hand, stories don't sell. On the other hand, every several years, there's some collection that people get onto that gets out there and that everyone talks about and da da da.
Right.
So not to
We're
say
going to make that your collection. That is, I mean, that's the thing is like, we have to make that your collection. Like I read, so the last story collection I probably read was by Curtis Sittenfeld, whom I love, who's really a novelist, but she wrote stories and I absolutely love them. And so I also predict that I will love your stories because I love your writing. So are they all set in New York?
No, it's a bit of a mix. I mean, some in New York, some of them are, let's say, women traveling and getting into trouble abroad.
Okay.
So there's a bit of a mix, third person, first person. There's sort of a contrarian theme where people acting the way they shouldn't, for lack of a better word.
Oh my gosh, I cannot wait. All right. It's okay because we have the same publisher, so I know that they will send them to me and I don't have to ask. But it brings me to my last question, which is, what is your reading life like? What have you read lately? What do you recommend? And like, how does reading fit into your workday, etc.?
Well, so in terms of the latter, I've actually in sort of my mature life, I've come to now sometimes allow myself to read during the day. I didn't used to. Reading was a sin because you were supposed to be writing and so on. But now I've realized that if I don't read sometimes during the work hours, then I'm not reading because I'll fall into bed at night. I'll be too tired. I've been reading. So before this book, as this book was germinating, I was reading a ton of stories. I was rereading and rereading my favorites. John, Cheever, Alice Munro. I love Mavis Gallant. She's my new favorite. But then I don't know about you, but when I get into a book, I definitely get a little bit of anxiety of influence. And I don't want to read anything super literary. I don't want to read, not that's the wrong term, but I don't want to read something that I might start to unconsciously or not imitate. So I have been going back to, I read a lot of mysteries. I love, speaking of pen names, Barbara Vine. I'm always hoping to find one that I haven't read. And usually I do. I usually dig one up that I have of hers that I haven't read. I like her writing as Ruth Rendell too, but I just happen to love Barbara Vine. And so I was reading, that kind of stuff. And then I also, during COVID, went on this Shirley Jackson kick.
Okay.
I couldn't, I think I'd read Hill House, but I reread Haunting of Hill House. I reread We Have Always Lived in the Castle. Then I started in her stories. And then I was reading Patricia Highsmith. So it was one of these mystery, weird, all those.
Right.
And I just think that I think Shirley Jackson and Highsmith are just both amazing. And just also so much fun and interesting. And I didn't feel that I would suddenly start having a ghost haunting my short stories. So it was sort of a good mix to read something really fresh, I think, as the days that they were published, but also, not, picking up Hemingway and suddenly you're writing in short discursive sentences. And
right.
So it was a way to read, but not read in a way that would seep into what I was doing. Right.
That makes perfect sense. I mean, I do read during my workday because I've written so many books that I'm not worried about being influenced by somebody else. I mean, that's like one good thing about writing all these darn books is I am not worried about sounding like somebody else. I know I sound like myself, but I do feel like I read very literary fiction. I read the best fiction I can get my hands on, such as Mrs. I like contemporary literary fiction. Like that's what I'm after, because I feel like when I'm reading writing that is very, very good, that it improves my writing. Not that I'm imitating it, but just that I can see a higher bar and I aspire to the higher bar. I don't, for anybody who's watching who reads my books, it's like I aspire to be better than probably the genre would suggest, the genre that I write in, which is speech books. But I want to write the best speech books out there. And I'm reading a book that is a beach book that's not as good as the stuff I normally read. And I'm also like being very conscious to like say, why isn't it as good? Because I think that informs also how you write when you read things that aren't as good.
Absolutely. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean,
I would die to know like who you read, but I guess that might be for another conversation.
Yeah, I know. We're gonna have to. I just finished a fantastic So I read a lot of things in galley, as you might imagine, and I'm sure you get sent galleys as well. I'm reading a fantastic memoir by Jamie Attenberg called I Came All This Way to Meet You, and it's about her journey as a writer. That's not out till January, but that also talks about reading as a writer. Okay, Caitlin, you're the best. Mrs. For anybody who hasn't read it, absolutely fabulous. And it was so good. So good to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ellen.